Hi guys, I am here with a true story. This one is called Hope's Golden Thread. And the quote that goes along with this story is by the Little Prince. It is only with the heart that one can see rightly what is essential and invisible to the eyes. Okay, so let's begin Hope's Golden Thread. Like a golden thread from heaven, loved ones may come just when we most need encouragement. Kevin told CFRB radio listeners in Toronto about what happened when he was a shy 17-year-old and decided to run in his first marathon. Although Kevin's grandfather had died when Kevin was just a baby, he had always been close to his grandmother in Scotland, and before the race he phoned her to ask for prayers. "I'll send you some special help," the elderly lady promised. Kevin ran well, but with about 2 miles left, he felt himself faltering. How he hated to give up after training so hard. Just then, a youth about my age in shorts and running shoes overtook me, Kevin said. I told him I was about to drop out. "No, you can't do it," the other runner insisted. "I'll be right behind you all the way." Suddenly, Kevin felt a surge of energy and ran on. He could hear the youth behind him, but when he crossed the finish line and turned around, the pavement was empty. A few days later, Kevin came across an old family album and found a yellowed photo of a young man in running shoes. His skin prickled. It was the boy who had encouraged him during the race. Kevin turned the photo over. On the back was written the young man's name. It was his grandfather at age 17. Kevin had sorely needed a boost of his self-image, realizing that he could win if he worked hard, and that someone special was watching over him, gave him the confidence he needed to move into his adult life. Amen. Not much was known about addiction in the 1940s, when as a farm youngster, Bob began to drink. But by the time he was 32 years old, with a wife and 3 small children, Bob was an alcoholic. Suddenly, his father died, leaving Bob to run the well drilling business both had started several years ago. "My dad missed his father very much," says daughter Chris Tuttle, and he began to think more seriously about how he was living his own life. In April 1967, Bob completely stopped drinking. Wow. A short time later, Bob hired a young drifter, Pete, who was also an alcoholic. Maybe he can get him stopped too. Separated from his wife, Pete had no place to stay and no transportation to and from work at the drilling well. Bob gave Pete a job, a room in his own house, and support in his attempts to stay sober. "My dad really cared a lot about helping others in need." Chris recalls it was not uncommon for him to lend a hand or befriend someone in Pete's position. But despite Bob's kindness, Pete couldn't handle sobriety. He returned to alcohol and shortly after committed suicide. Grief and shock over the loss of 2 significant people in his life, the strain of running a business, providing for his family's needs, and controlling his own addiction, it all seemed to push Bob to the brink. Gradually, his personality changed. Once lively, he became depressed, lethargic, and uncommunicative. He refused to sleep at night and paced the floor, worried his mother and his wife, brought him to the psychiatric ward of a veterans hospital. But the day after Bob was hospitalized, his wife received a call from the ward. "Your husband is missing," an official told her. "He seems to have walked away." "My mother was stunned," Chris recalls. "She told the authorities to begin a search right away." Worried friends and relatives gathered at the house. Some wept. Something terrible could happen to Bob. What should they do? 6-year-old Chris was confused. "Why is everyone upset?" she asked. "We can't find your father, honey," one of the relatives tried to explain. "Wasn't that what God was for?" the little girl wondered. "All we had to do is tell him about it," she pointed out. The woman looked at Chris, out of the mouth of babes. "You pray for your daddy," she said. Chris climbed into bed and snuggled under the covers. She thought about her father. What did it matter if others thought him lost? God knew where he was, she whispered. "I prayed for Daddy, and that's all I can do. You take care of him now. I'm tired and I'm going to sleep," and she did. A few hours later, hospital officials found Bob. He had been wandering on a 4-lane interstate highway several miles from the institution. He had no money, no telephone numbers to call, and nowhere to go for help. Furthermore, witnesses told authorities that Bob was deliberately moving to the middle of whichever lane had oncoming traffic, apparently so melancholy that being killed by a car seemed his only remaining option. Oh, poor Bob. But unbelievably, nothing hit him. Always the cars seemed to swerve just in time. The explanation Dad gave later convinced everyone he was hallucinating, Chris says. As a result, he was diagnosed as mentally ill and was returned to the hospital for treatment. He responded well, however, and was soon back with his family, his life restored. But Bob and Chris attribute his cure to more than doctors and therapy, for Bob still maintains that he was not alone as he roamed the dangerous highway that night. Walking on either side of him, he says there were his father and his friend Pete, once again alive and healthy. "We've come to protect you, Bob," each of the men explained. And that's what they did, shielding him from speeding cars, banishing his lonely desolation, guarding him until help came. Bob never saw the men again, but he believes they came that night in answer to a little girl's summons and brought him healing and hope. I hope you guys have a great rest of your night. Good night, guys.